Elizabeth Sills, and I'm the Grants and Programmes Manager at PRS Foundation, the UK's leading charitable funder of new music and talent development. And thank you for joining us for this in conversation with the brilliant musician and songwriter behind the project Flit, which was also supported by our Beyond Borders initiative. Beyond Borders is a co-commissioning and touring programme run by PRS Foundation in partnership with Creative Scotland, supported by the National Lottery through Creative Scotland's Open Project Fund, Arts Council of Wales, Arts Council of Northern Ireland, and Arts Council of Ireland. Beyond Borders was established in 2010 to support high-quality co-commissions and tours, stimulating collaboration between composers, performance groups, and music organisations across the 4 UK countries, and since 2014, the Republic of Ireland. Flit received Beyond Borders back in 2015, and so it's great to have Martin with us today to talk about the project and its success. So welcome, Martin Green.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Joining us.
Great to be here.
Happy. I'm just going to ask you a few questions about you and Flit and Beyond Borders. So Martin, thank you for joining us today. Could you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into performing and creating music?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm primarily a folk musician. My dad was a Morris dancer, which I think we can all agree is rock solid. And so I grew up playing the accordion for English traditional dance, and then I played a lot of Irish music, and I've lived in Scotland now for nearly 20 years, and I play a lot of Scottish music. And I think one of the great things about folk music is the performance opportunities arrive almost immediately, whether that's playing for a Morris team or playing for Cayleys or playing in folk clubs. It's one of the great things is you get a chance to play quite a lot. So that led to what seemed like quite a natural progression to playing in bands. So I've been playing in bands as a full-time occupation since I left school, and that has led on to projects that have other elements as well as music kind of over time, but it's always been music first, really.
Amazing, thank you. And let's start talking about Flit. So with this amazing piece, where did the ideas actually first come from?
So the initial germ of the idea was my grandparents were Jewish refugees, and I went to interview my grandmother, who was at that point quite old, to gather stories really just for me and for my kids and their kids. And so that was nothing. I didn't have a project in mind at that point. I just went and did it, and I had expected to get, I don't know why I thought this, I expected to get a more light-hearted kind of conversation than I did, which seems quite naive, really. But actually, obviously, they had a pretty harrowing existence, and so those stories seemed epic, like operatically epic. And so it felt like, oh, okay, these are not only interesting stories, that they're also something that I wanted to explore. I think a lot of people in similar situations would also want to kind of jump into their family history a little bit and kind of work out why they ended up where they ended up and those sorts of things. So and the timing was relevant as well. That was 2014, so we're in a run up to Brexit. We're seeing a kind of increasing right-wing rhetoric. We're seeing an awful lot of conversation around social migration, around human migration. So I also wanted to be involved in that conversation. I don't really enjoy arguing on social media. I find that quite a difficult platform for me. Some people do it brilliantly, but making work is my preferred outlet. So Flit became, so my grandmother and to some extent my grandfather were the spine of that project, but really it was a reflection on all sorts of social migration, with a kind of metaphor of animal migration. So there are a lot of birds in Flit. Our core image was a human that turns into a bird, flies away, turns back into a human somewhere else, and partly amongst all the kind of very challenging and difficult stories from my grandmother were these amazing stories of kindness, of strangers helping you in unknown environments, and so I started gathering stories from people that had moved country, some of them under very difficult circumstances, some of them under just hugely positive circumstances. Mine didn't really come into it, but I moved from England to Scotland, not the hugest of migrations, but it's still a different country, and I just did that because I fell in love and moved here to be with a brilliant woman. And there are other, there are loads of beautiful stories like that, and then so that was the core of why we did it, really.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. And when you had all these stories and information and everything that you gathered, all the ideas, how did you become involved with Opera North? Because obviously Beyond Borders is a co-commissioning program. So how did you end up working together, and what was their involvement in the project at the early stages?
So Opera North, and I think we'll probably come back to this a few times in this conversation. One of the things that I'm really passionate about talking about is the role of producers in making art of any sort. And I think it is a bit of a mystery to a lot of makers, what producers do, why they are so vital, and how to establish really positive working relationships with producers. And Opera North were the first producers I worked with. They had seen bits of stuff that I'd done with the band Lao and had asked me if I was interested in doing a piece for them based around folk songs to do with ghosts. And this was in 2013, probably. And the huge thing for me there was not only in that first project did I not have to kind of run around and organize every detail, which is a massive thing, but also Opera North are geared to, they have a whole building which is geared towards making work that goes on a stage, and they consider every aspect of that presentation. So it was the first time I'd had real conversations about lighting and staging and costume, and that was really mind-blowing to me. I've spent my life in predominantly instrumental music, and which is wonderful, but it's hard to put forward ideas in entirely instrumental music. It's pretty ethereal. Whereas an opera company that is used to looking at songs really and what they mean and what they do visually, that's an amazing thing. So I'd done that project with them, had the most brilliant time. And then when we had this idea for Flit, I spoke to them again, and I'll do a couple of shout outs. One is to Dominic Gray, who runs the projects department, who is a hugely open-minded individual who once described opera to me as anything with both words and music, which I think is that is such a brilliant attitude. It's not just Puccini, it's like it's whatever has words and music. And the other is Joe Knuckles, who was the kind of my primary contact and who produced this ghost show Crow's Bones and who came forward to do Flit with us. And the thing about amazing producers is they help you make your ideas better. They don't just impose their own ideas, which I think is something a lot of music makers, a lot of artists of all sorts are scared of. What they do is they help you question your ideas, put forward possible pitfalls and possible solutions, and that's a really amazing thing. And a lot of that went on with Flit. It was my first idea of what it might be would have cost £1 million, you know, and somebody that goes, well, that's a lovely idea, but it's unattainable. How do we keep the core of that but make it work? That's a brilliant thing. So Opera North, I've done a lot of work with them. They've been very, very good to me, very supportive. And if when those opportunities arise, kind of like giving yourself over to that, kind of going, here are all my ideas. Some of them are probably rubbish, and being happy with that, and realizing that producers are used to taking in loads of ideas and helping you filter. That's an amazing thing. So that was why I was so keen to work with them, and that was a big part of their process, as well as support. You know, we did all the rehearsal at Opera North. You know, obviously there's the application process that they're also involved in, but kind of the on the ground work, people that spend all their working lives help making bits of work better, are an absolute gem, you know.
No, thank you. I hope Opera North are watching this.
They know. I've told them many times, but anyway.
No, love Opera North. I'm going to mix up our questions a bit now, because we talked about the financing there, and obviously we're talking about grants with Beyond Borders. So Opera North did apply successfully for this project in 2015. Do you have any kind of inkling as to what the process in applying was like, or how long it might have taken, or long it took them, or how that, because you also mentioned budgeting earlier, how they came to their budget and things like that?
Yes, absolutely. So this is something else that I'm really keen to talk to artists. We need another word, because like I think it anyway, but I would use artists for people that make creative work of any sort. But it is a necessity to have the infrastructure to make your work, and that's a stumbling block for a lot of people. Like, it's like, I just want to make work and I don't want to think about budgets. I understand that. I think everyone would rather not, but I would urge anyone that's thinking about this sort of work to kind of learn to treat budgeting and application as part of the creative process. It is, you know, you've got to clean your brushes, you've got to sharpen your pencils, whatever it is that you make. Getting money to do the work is one of the steps, and it doesn't need to be hellish. It can be, and it's not the most fun bit, but it is part of the creative process. And so Flit was funded by several people. It also had Creative Scotland funding, and it also had Arts Council England funding, and I was involved in both of those applications a lot. Flit was big enough that it was worth starting a little company. So I started a company called Lepus with a producer called Penny King. And Penny taught me loads of brilliant things, but one of them is, don't plan twice. When you're making a project, do a real project plan for your application. Don't fall into this mindset of like, all right, one for the funders and one for us. That's not useful. Don't be realistic about your costs. Like, do the research the first time. Don't fudge a budget and then have to do it all again. Like, there's no point doing that. So and she sort of taught me to look at projects in a spreadsheet, and then you have your parameters, and this can be really relaxing, because you're like, okay, this is possible. We can have 3 people for 3 days, or we can't. We can have 2 people for 2 days. But then your artistic mind can really start thinking properly because you're in the parameters. So although Opera North did the Beyond Borders application, I was involved, Penny was involved, we talked about all of this. And PRSF applications are quite friendly, I think, in comparison to, for example, Arts Council England. And what I mean by that is you are asked for fewer, it's a quicker form, and you're asked for fewer substantiating pieces of evidence in the first instance. And I think that does speed things up. Gathering lots of information is slow. When I look at a form like Beyond Borders, I think maybe you could do it in 2 days. I think even if it's 2 days work, you need 2 weeks because you're waiting for people to answer questions. And I think this is something people fall into a trap of as well. Is like, you need partners. You need to wait for those organizations to have the chance to think about it, to come back to you and go, yeah, we're on board.
Really good point, because it will take, because there's so many things sometimes you haven't thought about when doing the funding application process. And I really like the point that you were making about not planning twice, because this application can be, feed into your whole project plan. And if you stick with that budget, because if you apply for the funders as well, you can, if you just stick to one budget, it is, from past experience as well, it is so much more useful, and your future self will thank you at the end of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I assume you must spend a lot of your life with budgets and spreadsheets. And do you find that increasingly you can see a project from a project plan as you do more of it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we look at applications for Beyond Borders and we see, where the money's going, you can see that this makes sense, or or unfortunately you can see that it's still very much in development at that point in time. But like, we've been, obviously you mentioned other partners that were involved and different musicians, many of them like household names. How was it getting so many people involved in your amazing idea and then seeing it coming to light?
That in the case of Flit, it was, I don't know if it's beginner's luck. It was the first project of this company, which is still going. We're still making things. Everyone I asked said yes the first time, and that's not always the case. So I was very lucky. I had met those people. So the people involved in that band were Adrian Utley, who's the guitar player with Portishead, and Dominic Aitchison, who's the bass player in Mogwai, Becky Unthank from the Unthanks, and Adam Holmes, who is a singer-songwriter from Edinburgh. And I had some amount of pre-existing relationship with all those people. Adrian and Becky I'd already done projects with. Dominic, Scotland's quite a small country. I'd hung out with him a bit. But that's not the same as people saying yes, So I was very lucky that they said yes, and that they said yes kind of quite quickly, because that makes a difference. The animators, who were a huge part of this as well, we had been looking for something to do together. And so they were sort of in before the beginning. We were, whatever was going to happen next was going to happen with their animation. So, and so I was lucky that they came in, and to be realistic without being cynical, in terms of getting, for example, venues to come on board, which is vital. Making a piece of work that nobody sees, it isn't great. It's not what you want. Do you know what I mean? You want to make a piece of work that people see or hear or whatever it is. And having a few people that help with ticket sales in that group does make it easier. I'm not suggesting that that's what everybody needs to do to make bits of work, but it was definitely part of the success of this project. And I know that it's not the remit of funders to care if people have profile necessarily, but I think to some extent at the end of the chain, the people selling tickets, it made a difference there, But also they're amazing. I mean, that was the point. That's how they have profile in the first place,
Yeah.
So yeah, we were very lucky there.
Yeah, and throughout a lot of our schemes at PRS Foundation, we are always looking at what this project will do for the music creator involved. And this is one of the very few kind of touring projects which allows these partnerships across borders within the British Isles. And it's the only touring project that we are able to work with the Republic of Ireland. So it is really exciting. And speaking of kind of that process, what was the process of kind of recording and organizing the touring of the music across the nations of the UK? Were there any kind of highs and challenges of performing it live in different places, and where did you go with this project?
So the first show was at Edinburgh Festival. So we started in Scotland, and the tour went down through England, but the biggest challenge, and I don't regret it for a minute, but it was an exciting little journey, was we did Brighton and then Shetland. And to get to Shetland, you go to Aberdeen and you get on the ferry, and it's 12 hours overnight. And Flit was touring a truck with the set in it, and getting the truck from Brighton to getting us wasn't too bad, getting the humans, but getting the truck from Brighton to Shetland. Shetland was my favorite gig of all of them, actually, and partly because it's a magical place, but partly I think because actually on a very small landmass, the subject of migration is slightly different. It's slightly less hysterical, I think, than it was, like, because we have to remember it's 2016, like, between, the Brexit vote was 3 weeks before our first show, so we're at the height of quite an hysterical moment of considering social migration. So and Shetland is just a different place, and it has its own environment, but it also has, on the face of it, it's not particularly diverse in heritage. It's mostly either historically Nordic or Pictish, but it's a very white place. And however, it also has very different attitudes, because you have had these people who have arrived from different places for so many different reasons, because it's a port. And so the conversation, and this was great every night, the conversations with people that you meet afterwards. If you do any show with stories in it, people come up and tell you their stories. It is to some extent an open invitation for conversation, which is great. And it's that's one of the points of art, is to have conversations. And so the conversations were quite different, that we would have in Shetland. So it was absolutely brilliant. And there is no way we could have done that show without Beyond Borders funding, because it's extremely expensive to get to Shetland. And and returning to looking at a project on a budget, when you look at it, it's like, okay, that's by far the most expensive show, and hugely worthwhile.
Amazing. So we got Shetland, Brighton, Edinburgh. Was there anywhere else?
Sorry. So we did the Barbican in London. We did what was then Sage Gateshead, which is now the Glass House. We did Brighton Dome. We did the Lighthouse in Poole. This is good for the memory. This is a few years ago now. We went to Howard Assembly Rooms, which is Opera North's venue in Leeds. I'm very sure that I'm missing some out. And then we went to Australia, which was brilliant.
Oh, wow.
We went to Perth International Festival, which was great. 40 degrees. That was a bit of
melting the plane.
Yeah. And some of the band went for a run. It's like, no, you're all right. I'm gonna stay in this air-conditioned room. You enjoy your run. Yeah.
I'll stay by the pool.
That's right.
Yeah. And so obviously you toured so many amazing places in the UK, and the projects are so successful that you've been able to go international. So what has the legacy of Flit been for you?
For me, I don't want to. 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 I don't overplay, but it has been a life-changing experience, because without Flit, I wouldn't have started a company, and that's quite a different life. And this is something else that I'm always keen to talk to makers about, is on one level, a company can just be you and a logo. Do you know what I mean? It's not, you don't need an office. We've never had a building, but suddenly you can have different sorts of conversations with people, and also you're one little level removed from emotionally from how the work is sold. Is a nasty word, because we don't like to use, but do you know what I mean? We don't like to think about the buying and selling of, but actually at the end of the day, it comes back to, you need infrastructure, so I found that really useful for two reasons. One is, you're not phoning people up and going, I'm me, I'm making this, do you want me? You're saying, we are making this. So that's great. And when you're actually in a room making things with people, it feels more collective. And so when people do occasionally ask me, was it worth starting a company, I always say yes, for the sake of doing a few tax returns a year and paying for a website. It's actually I have found it anyway, it's really changed. So the result of Flit for me is, we started this little company that already had a little bit of success with this project. And so and the other thing, which is sort of just a logistical thing, is if you are an organization, you can apply for things as an organization, and that makes a difference as well. And there are only two of us involved kind of all the time, and a lot of freelancers that come in and out, but it's enough to keep a core going on that feels like you're building something. And that for me, that's like, that's a wonderful life.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Obviously there's been a lot of important kind of career objectives that you've been able to achieve from doing Flit, and also the teams that you've been working with. But what was the kind of creative process like? What was it like creating the music? How was that kind of developed?
Yeah, let's talk about that. That's much more fun. Yeah. So the music,
all questions are fun.
All questions are fun. Yeah, especially like questions about that, they're fun. Yeah. So I make a lot of music by recording loads and loads of stuff and seeing what's any good. Everyone makes music in different ways. I tend not to hear formed ideas in my head and write them down. People that do that blow my mind. I think that's amazing. But for me, I make a lot of recordings, and then I go through them, and I go, okay, there's something there, which incidentally is also how Lau make their music, and I think that process is sort of ingrained in me now. So what I did with Flit, which was wonderful, was that instead of making all that myself, I went to Adrian Utley's studio in Bristol, and we recorded for 3 days, and we didn't question anything, we didn't judge anything, we just made hours and hours of jamming with guitars and synths and samplers and accordions and all sorts of stuff. And then I went home with lots of stuff and went through and went, okay, this is a little thing, and this is a little thing. And Adrian is like a tap, you just go play and he plays, and it's brilliant. So I went through it all, and I chopped it into bits, and so you've got a Dropbox full of musical ideas. And then in terms of storytelling, I went through the interviews. Interviewing people is brilliant. This was my first foray into interviewing people, and that is also something that I've done a lot more of in the years since. Another thing that has changed my life about Flit, I found out that if you go to someone's house with a recording device and you mean it, and you say, I am genuinely interested in what you have to say, they talk in a completely different way. It's not like a pub conversation. And especially if you're saying, how did you arrive in this country? What does it feel like to be in it? I think these are questions that people get asked less than I had imagined, and that people are really happy to talk to you about them and are really generous to kind of give bits of their life to you and go like this, you know. And from that, I transcribed them, and then I wrote fictional prose about those stories, if that makes sense. So I just went through and so, for example, there's a song called Suitcase, and which was co-written with Kareem Poet, and that's partly, some of that is straight from my relationship with my grandfather. Some of that who had what I think is probably not an unusual immigrant attitude towards protective survival, and as a result, quite hard. A wonderful man, but quite a hard man, you know. So part of it's about that, and then the actual name came from another story that I collected about somebody's father that kept a packed suitcase next to the front door for the whole of their life, which I just thought was like, that's a killer metaphor, and also that's a traumatized human. Do you know what I mean? You shouldn't need to live a life where you keep a suitcase next to them. So I wrote these stories, I had these bits of music, and then I talked to 3 brilliant songwriters, Kareem Poet, who did several of the songs. I gave her the stories, I gave her the bits of music, and she made songs out of them. We live very close to each other, so we go to and fro over cups of tea quite a lot. Anais Mitchell, who lives in America, and her process was more solitary. She wrote a song called Roll Away and sent it to me, and it's like, there's nothing wrong with that. And I like, that's brilliant. There was no to and fro. She just like spat it out. Great. And a guy called Sandy Wright, who is less well known, but a brilliant songwriter, who also lives in Edinburgh. So we did that together. And then I wrote some of it, some of those words myself. So then you've got this kind of dilution of ideas. There's some commonality in what it sounds like because it's all come from these same initial jams. There's the themes are joined through these kind of stories and bits of prose that I've said to the songwriters, but actually there are 3 very unique songwriting voices within it as well, which I don't know, I hear quite clearly. I don't know if that comes across to other people.
Yeah, no, it sounds amazing. And so many different creators to be working with on this project. Obviously, you loved working on this project and it's had a huge impact. What have you got coming up next?
So during lockdown, I started writing scripts, sort of by accident. And because I started making audio drama because it's one of the things that we could do. So I've written a couple of scripts, and one of them is nearly a play now. We've done a little bit of development on it. It's a play about a young woman in a brass band, and so we've been working on that, which has been amazing. Absolutely amazing. Actors are kind of new to me, having done these sort of theatrical music things and never actually done anything with real actors. They're mind blown. I used to think we were quite similar jobs, actors and musicians, but actually, no, there's a whole weird thing going on there where you pretend to be someone else for a living. I'm sure it's like deeply unhealthy, but I'm totally hooked. I hadn't realized how long it takes to make theatre, or rather, I hadn't realized how quickly music is made, and the interesting things about the difference in processes. On the whole, music is either kind of made in the room by some people that jam it together, like Lau, for example, or it's written down and some people turn up and they play it, but it's sort of finished before they start playing it. Theatre's a much slower burn, so it takes years to make a play, which I'm really enjoying. I'm also like really, really impatient individual. So it's been quite good for me to learn that. And I've been spending a lot of time with brass bands, which has been great. And we did a youth project with the New Music Biennial, playing some brass band music that I'd written with the youth project. And I continue to do some work with brass bands, some of it theatrical, like the play, some of it purely musical. I'm going down to Cardiff to the Welsh College of Music and Drama to do a project with their brass band and to talk to their students a little bit. So that's going on, and Lao, who have been a little bit in hibernation, are coming back out. We are having our little festival, Lowland, in Edinburgh on the 14th and 15th of October. So if anyone wants to come to Edinburgh for the weekend, it's going to be super awesome. Yeah, so yeah, it's good, and it feels a little bit like the world is coming out of hibernation a bit in terms of people going to see things, and gigging is a little bit back to normal, so
it's an exciting time. And it's so cool that you're creating a theatre piece now as well, another string to your bow. That's exciting.
It's really exciting, and I quite like that. A steep learning curve is really fulfilling because you learn a lot very quickly. Then there's the other thing, which is actually getting good at something when it plateaus out, which is much, much harder and requires far more self-discipline. So I think there's something about doing things that you haven't done before that I always find exciting.
I mean, thank you so much for joining us today, Martin. Have you got any last kind of pieces of advice or encouragement for those thinking about applying to Beyond Borders? Like, any words of wisdom?
Yeah, so definitely do it. You even if you don't get it this time, everything will be stronger for having been through that process. The more times you go through that process, the stronger that muscle gets. And if you can find a way to sort of separate this infrastructure that I keep talking about from the actual bit where you're making work, because that's the other thing, you don't want to start ignoring your practice, So if there is some way that you can do that, either through finding a brilliant producer or setting up a little company, whatever it is that helps you kind of go, right, this is infrastructure and logistics, and this is making creative stuff, then everything will be great forever.
Yes, great forever. Love it. Thank you so much, Martin.